Welcome to my first YouTube video. I am so excited. This is always something I have wanted to do, so I'm actually taking the initiative and doing it. But I just realized my bathroom door is open too, so give me a second. Welcome to my very first YouTube video. I'm so excited because this is something that I've always wanted to do, and I'm finally gaining the courage enough to go after my dream and taking the initiative and finally filming my very first video. I will say that I was trying to be cute earlier and I did spill my drink all over my nice little green carpet and almost on my equipment. So now that I have cleaned that up, I have shut my bathroom door, we're gonna get right into the video. Hello there and welcome. My name is Alicia Marie, and here on this channel we will investigate every crime, every mystery, and take a deep dive into history. I hope you like that. It took me a while to get that rhyme. But if this interests you in any way, please take a seat, get comfortable, and go grab yourself some snacks. Because for the next half an hour, you and I will be talking all about the McKinley quadruple murders, or also known as the Truett Street Massacre. McKinley, Texas is the type of place, the type of town where Friday nights revolve around one thing: high school football. It is truly a football town, and no other team embodies the town spirit more than the McKinley North Bulldogs. In March of 2004, on the field, 3 players stood out. Leonard Barbosa, he was the quarterback and really just had that sense of a natural born leader. Austin York, he was a defensive back, and people said he always had the most amazing timing on the football field. He was always in the right spot at the right time, and was also known as a relentless defender on the field. And then we have Matt Self. Matt was a linebacker. He was an absolute beast on the field. Off the field, he was described as easygoing and such a nice guy, but when he was on the field, when he had his cleats on, they really did renown him as an animalistic beast. And if McKinley North had a #1 fan, it definitely would have been Mark Barbosa, Leonard's older brother. He was always the loudest fan in the stadium, and he always came to every game decked out in full face paint and the Bulldogs colors. He cheered his younger brother and his former team on with relentless passion, and he himself was actually a football star before he received an injury that took him out of the game and even left him wheelchair bound for a short period of time. During his recovery, Mark actually moved in with his aunt, Rosa Barbosa, who was more than just their aunt. She really became a second mother for all 3 of the Barbosa boys. Rosa had no children of her own, so she really dedicated her life to taking care of her 3 nephews, which included Mark, Leonard, and their younger brother, Robert. After he was fully healed, Mark decided to stay living with his aunt. They had such an amazing relationship, and she was just the type of person that it didn't bother her. She loved having her nephew close with her, and she was just such a selfless soul. Even when Mark's other brother, Robert, went through his own hard times, his aunt Rosa allowed him to move into the house also. That's how much she loved these boys. They were just like a part of her. Not many people would allow not just 1, but 2 other mouths to feed in their house. So I hope this really helps you understand what an amazing woman she was. It was just a typical Friday night in the town of McKinley, Texas, a place known for its quiet streets and strong sense of community, when the four boys, Austin York, Matt Self, Leonard Barbosa, and Leonard's older brother, Mark Barbosa, were playing video games at home and unwinding after a very long week. Eventually, everyone but Leonard decided that they were kind of hungry, so that they were going to go get some pizza across town, and Leonard decided to stay back at the house. And it was also agreed that after they got done eating, they were going to drop Matt back at his house because he had an 11:30 curfew. Meanwhile, across town, police had gotten a call about a potential break-in at a cash checking business. When police arrived, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. There were no signs of forced entry, nothing hinting that there had been a potential break-in or robbery, just the front door unlocked and opened. Because there was no immediate evidence that there was a crime, police officers just thought that maybe the workers forgot to lock up shop after they had left and decided to deem it as a false alarm. But before officers could investigate any further, a call came in about a shooting in a residential neighborhood. Now, McKinley is a town not really known for any violent crime, so this was very unusual, and the break-in was going to have to wait because such a violent crime in such a quiet town is going to take top priority from its police department. When Robert Barbosa arrived home after his long shift at work, he walked into something straight out of a nightmare. A bloody massacre had occurred at his aunt's house. And this was just the beginning, because McKinley would never be the same after this. When officers arrived to the Barbosa home, from the doorway they could see Robert sobbing uncontrollably on the ground, holding Matt Self's head in his lap. They noted a pool of blood was surrounding both Matt and Robert, and that it appeared Matt was still barely clinging to life as his breath was very shallow, but he was still alive at this point. Just a few feet away from Matt and Robert, they found the bodies of Austin and Mark. Austin had received a fatal gunshot wound to his head and was clearly deceased upon officers' arrival. Mark was found sprawled across a bed with his head resting on the floor. In his desperate attempt to flee, he was shot, and that's where police found him. In another bedroom, officers found Rosa Barbosa. She was lying face down on the floor. Duct tape covered her entire face, covered her mouth, her nose, her eyes, and they found a zip tie tied around her neck. That night, officers found 4 victims. 3 were deceased upon arrival and 1 barely clinging to life. After officers secured the crime scene, they took Matt. He was airlifted to the nearest hospital. And officers struggled to process the brutality of the crime scene. McKinley, a town where high school football was above everything else, was rocked to its core. 2 of its most beloved athletes, Austin York and Matt Self, were among the victims. News of their murders, along with the murders of Rosa and Mark Barbosa, spread like wildfire through the town. A crime like this had really never occurred in McKinney before, so this was such a heartbreaking discovery, and it left people wondering why and how. At the hospital, doctors worked tirelessly to save Matt, but there was really nothing they could do at that time. He was declared brain dead, and the following morning he passed away. With no fingerprints or DNA evidence, officers had little to go on. They found a couple of spent shell casings at the crime and one bullet lodged in the wall, but other than that, really nothing else. But one thing investigators concluded very quickly on in the investigation was with the size and strength of the victims that most likely there had to be more than one perpetrator of the crime. Because how else would someone overpower and execute 4 people so quickly and efficiently and not leave any evidence behind? And yet, at the crime scene, investigators found that nothing had been stolen. Nothing of value was taken from the home, and there were no signs of forced entry. So this wasn't a robbery gone wrong, and investigators were scratching their heads and wondering why. As detectives investigated possible motives of the crime, they turned their attention to Robert Barbosa, the only living family member in the home at the time, and the person that made the 911 call. Of course, this is standard procedure by police, but it still left a lot of people in the community wondering if he was a witness or if he was actually one that committed the crime. Once Robert arrived at the police station, police noted that throughout his interview he was visibly distraught, he was sobbing uncontrollably at times, and really just seemed to have a lot of genuine grief at the moment. And his emotions seemed genuine, but police really started to see that some of his statements were not adding up. Robert claimed that after he got done with work, he arrived at the home he shared with his aunt and brother. He walked through the door and walked through the house where he found the bodies of the 3 boys first. He then decided to run to his aunt's room, and of course that's where he found Rosa lying face down. He checked her pulse to see if she was still alive, and of course found out that she was deceased. He then ran back into the room where the boys were at and checked their pulses also. And that's where he found that Matt was still alive, and he decided to call 911 at the time. But police were kind of confused by this. Officers estimated that it should have only taken Robert about 2 to 3 minutes to walk through the house, find the victims, and then make the 911 call. But the 911 call disputed this. Robert on the call said he had been home for about 10 minutes at that time before deciding to call the police. That left about a 6-minute gap of time that was unaccounted for. Detectives found this very strange and were wondering what had Robert been doing for those 6 minutes that he didn't call police. And a polygraph only deepened their suspicions of Robert because he actually failed. But he also tested negative for any gunpowder residue, meaning that he did not shoot a weapon at all that night. Then investigators made another discovery next door at the neighbor's house. They found a marijuana plant. Stuffed in the garbage can at the end of the neighbor's driveway, which they had found very suspicious. So they decided to ask Robert about it. Robert admitted that before he decided to call 911, he grabbed the plant that he had been growing and decided to go throw it away in the neighbor's garbage can because at the time he was on probation. And also he didn't want the presence of drugs, marijuana, at the crime scene falsely lead police into thinking that this might have been a drug-related crime, which low-key I kind of get, although it wasn't smart and actually there was somebody dying in the house at that time. Matt was still alive at that time. being a minority, I kind of see like where he's coming from. So like, do what you gotta do at that point. And even though investigators found this very weird and suspicious, they actually cleared him as a suspect. From the beginning, investigators already thought Rosa Barbosa was the intended target of the crime. She was the only victim that was found bound, gagged. She also was found to be tortured and beaten and then shot. And none of that had happened to the other three victims in the house. And it was weird because she was known as such a nice and selfless lady who wanted to lead such a quiet life. She had no known enemies at that time, or really at any time. So police were kind of wondering why anyone would decide to target her. Then a family member revealed a very key detail, that Rosa had decided to quit her job at a bank in town and got hired at a check cashing business. The same check cashing business on the same night that was called in for a potential break-in. And it was the same like business that officers had gone to before going to the quadruple murder crime scene. They made the chilling connection finally after hearing this detail. On the same night as the murders, McKinney police officers responded to a potential break-in call, and when they went to the business, they found no evidence that a crime had been committed and just assumed that whoever just got done with their shift forgot to lock and close the front doors. But now the detectives had a theory. The killers went to Rosa's house, where they then tortured her to get her keys to the cash checking business and also the alarm code. Then they killed all of the victims in the house to eliminate the possibility of witnesses coming forward later on. They then drove across town to the cash checking place where they planned to use Rosa's key to open up the doors, disarm the alarm, and then go into the back where they kept cash safes. But before they could go through with this plan, the alarm went off and they fled before they could leave with any of the goodies. And that's why nothing was stolen at the check cashing place, because before they could actually go through with the real crime, they had to flee. Then officers caught a breakthrough in the case because during Rosa's autopsy, when they peeled back the tape that was found on her face, embedded in the tape were pieces of a latex glove. And in those pieces of a latex glove, they found DNA evidence. The only thing was now they just needed a suspect to match the DNA to. And although this was a breakthrough, the case of the McKinley quadruple murders went cold until April 15th of 2004. A local man named James Jones was arrested for kidnapping, and he was facing some real time. I think this was kind of one of his last strikes. So he decided to approach McKinney PD with an offer to get a lesser sentence. He would give them critical information about the McKinney quadruple murders. And of course McKinney PD was interested because at this point it had been a couple of months and they still had no leads in the case. And James Jones was a known informant. He had been helpful in a number of drug-related crimes before his kidnapping charges. Jones alleged that one of the victims at the Barbosa house was basically a cocaine dealer, and the crimes were drug-related. And I know this probably really upset not only the Barbosa family, but also the families of the other two victims, because it was the whole point that Robert had lied to the police, that he, threw away that marijuana plant because he didn't want them to think that this crime was linked to drugs in any way. But according to James Jones' story, that night of the murders, James was at the Barbosa home. He was in the living room while the 4 victims were in the kitchen. In the living room, he was drinking a beer when all of a sudden 2 acquaintances that Jones knew walked into the house, went into the kitchen, and started an argument with one of the victims, leading them to get out of control and then shoot all 4 victims. They then decided to flee, as well as James Jones. But Jones's account quickly was discounted because he couldn't even remember some of the most basic details about the crime. Not only that, they found no beer can with Jones's DNA at the crime scene, but he couldn't even tell them the layout of the house, where the victims were shot, or even what the victims looked like. So it was pretty quickly concluded that Jones was just trying to give police what they wanted to hear so that he could get a lesser sentence, which infuriated a lot of the families of the victims because, again, just a piece of shit, You've got basically 3 young men and an older woman that were murdered for no reason, and here comes this guy who's honestly a piece of shit. He's, been to prison a couple of times. He's not like that great of a guy, trying to get something out of this, and really wasn't there to help the victims at all. He just cared about himself. Not only that, but DNA evidence also disproved his claims because when trying to match the DNA evidence found on the duct tape that binded Rosa and tried to match it to Jones and these 2 acquaintances that he claimed were there that night, the DNA did not match, and evidence does not lie. Over the next 3 years, the case really went cold. Police had more than 500 leads, but all of them took them nowhere. The case had unfortunately stalled at this point, until McKinney PD received a phone call from a woman that would change everything. A woman contacted police and told them that her boyfriend, Eddie Williams, the night before had admitted to her that he knew who had committed these murders back in 2004. And with some persuasion, the couple decided that they were okay with the police coming and getting them and taking them down to the police station so that they could make a statement. And inside the interrogation room, Eddie admitted to police that he knew who had done the crime, and it included himself too. Inside the interrogation room, Eddie revealed some of the most graphic and gruesome details of the crime. He and 2 brothers, Raul and Javier Cortez, were planning to rob Rosa Barbosa after her shift at the check cashing business. The plan was simple. Eddie was going to go up to her front door, knock, and ask her if she had seen a puppy running around the neighborhood. And as Eddie was asking Rosa these questions, the 2 Cortez brothers would run from behind him and push their way into Rosa's house, where they then would lock the door behind them. Once inside the home, the 2 brothers pushed Rosa down to the ground and dragged her to her room, where they would then begin interrogating her about where her keys to the check cashing business were and the alarm code to the business. At that time, Eddie was still in the living room. I don't know doing what, but he was not a part of the gruesome torture of Rosa. But he did say he could hear them beating and torturing her to get this information. As this all unfolded, Eddie saw that headlights were pulling into the driveway of the Barbosa home, and as the three boys walked inside, that is when Raul came out of Rosa's room with a gun and immediately started shooting the boys. After they murdered all four of the victims, they then decided to head across town to the check cashing business to complete the main part of their plan. Javier, armed with Rosa's keys, unlocked the check cashing place, but he was only in there for a few seconds when the alarm went off, and I guess he freaked out and decided to run back out to the car, where they then just left. They fled and didn't even really try to get any of the money or get into the safes of the back room of the business. So kind of really just for nothing, basically. At first, investigators were very skeptical about this because, again, with James Jones, they had gone through a lot of leads that kind of went nowhere. But to prove his involvement and the involvement of the Cortez brothers, Eddie revealed some very insider knowledge. That night before the murders, Eddie and the Cortez brothers were at Raul's residence, where he had test fired the gun into the ceiling of his home, and he told investigators that they could probably still find that bullet lodged in the ceiling, and that should be enough to prove that what he was saying about the murders and the details was true because he was there. When police searched Raul's former residence, they indeed did find that bullet still lodged in the ceiling, and it was an exact match to the .25 caliber weapon that was used in the murders. With physical evidence linking Raul Cortez to the crime scene, all they needed now was basically DNA evidence as proof that the Cortez brothers were involved. So police did an undercover operation to get the Cortez's DNA, and they picked up some cigarette butts outside of Raul's workplace that they then tested against the DNA evidence found on the duct tape. When the DNA evidence came back, it was undisputable that Raul Cortez was at the crime scene that night because his DNA was found on the latex glove that was found on the duct tape that bounded Rosa Barbosa. And investigators decided to go ahead and charge Raul with the murders. Investigators tried to find tangible evidence that Javier was at the crime scene at that time, so they decided to get a search warrant for his house. And in that search, investigators found a lot of weapons. They found 3 weapons, one with the serial number scratched off, which is, first of all, uber legal, and then another weapon that was stolen, which, second of all, is also uber legal, and then another automatic weapon. In this search, they also found marijuana in his house. And now with the findings of drugs in his residence, that made Javier a drug user that was also in possession of firearms, which I didn't know, but is actually a federal offense. And Javier was then arrested with firearms charges. In January of 2009, Raul was convicted of capital murder, which in Texas carries an automatic death sentence. And despite his multiple tries for appeals within the Texas Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court, they were all denied. He is still waiting on his execution date. Eddie Williams pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder, and he received a sentence of 20 years. Also because he cooperated, and if it wouldn't have been for him, they don't know if the murders would have ever been solved. While Javier Cortez was never actually convicted for the murders, he did plead guilty to firearms charges and served a 4-year sentence, which unfortunately fucking sucks for the victims' families, but actually nothing I could say could make them feel better, so I'm not going to say anything. But what I will say, what was such a plan made out of the greed of 3 men took the lives of 3 young men, actually young boys who actually hadn't lived a life at all, and a woman who so selflessly cared about others and was so relentlessly loved by her family members. It is just such an unfortunate case and such a disgusting crime. But yeah, this was such a heinous crime that left such a deep scar on the McKinney community. So that is it for today's case, but please let me know what you think about this case, and if you have any suggestions on any cases that I should cover in the future, please leave it in the comments below. I am so open to anything you guys have to suggest, and also I want to make this channel for you guys, and let me know what you guys are interested in. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and maybe even turn on those channel notifications for me so you don't miss any more uploads I have coming in the future. I plan to upload on Monday and Thursdays, so please look forward to those, and please subscribe. Please, I'm not begging, but I would love it if we could kind of just like start a community on my channel. But yeah, I upload every Monday and every Thursday. But that is it for today. So I will see you guys in the next video. And please stay safe out there and take care of yourself.